Good morning, friends, and welcome to yet another Microsoft Excel tutorial video for single case design. If you've watched the first video and made it this far, I commend you and thank you for your perseverance and patience in what's not necessarily the most dynamic and engaging topic and visual display. Today, sometimes it helps to have the endpoint in mind, or at least in the back of your mind, while you are learning a certain task. And today I am only going to walk through a completed graph and the elements of that completed graph and occasionally relate them back to the spreadsheet information from the first video. Then subsequent videos, we will take a step-by-step approach to chain our way toward what this ending point looks like for this particular set of data. As always, if you look in the show notes or the show description, there will be links to these files so that you can follow along for yourself. And if you have any questions on these videos, have a spreadsheet that you would like me to help you out with, have just general Microsoft Excel questions, how do I create a multiple baseline exam, etc., multiple baseline design, feel free to email perseverebook@gmail.com, and as long as I can, I will be addressing those in video format. This is an example of the beginnings of an AB design. It is only the A and the B right now. The A would be baseline, the B would be treatment. I have entered in data into the spreadsheet, and first to orient toward the graph. We have our y-axis. This is our vertical axis. It is perpendicular to the ground or the bottom of your screen. It is labeled as exercise minutes per day. Try to be pithy with your axis labels and describe only what makes it go up and down or left and right. So here, the y-axis going up and down. Describing only what's being graphed is the exercise minutes per day. You could throw in average on top of it. It is somewhat assumed that it's an average because on our x-axis down at the bottom here, I'm going to try and get real fancy. Hold, please. Well, that's not necessarily always the most helpful. Ta-da! Second video, I get real fancy. Week. If it's exercise per day, exercise minutes per day, and the x-axis is week, it is assumed that there has to be some sort of average to come up to a week. Can I move this around now? Oh, look at that. I'm gonna stash this over here for now. Don't pay attention to the circle. Anywho, we have at the top of our graph a handy dandy text box with our labels, baseline and treatment. You always want to correlate the phase of what you're doing. Phase meaning, what are you up to? Are you just trying to collect data on where you're starting? That would be baseline. Are you trying to change? Are you actively trying to change that behavior, which would be treatment? If it switches back and forth, if you have multiple treatments, you can always add treatment 1, treatment 2. It pays to have the most simple labels up here as well, because as this, oops, see? Every student I have is laughing right now. As, let's see, and I can't even get it down there. Anyway, as the right part of the x-axis has to get extended, as this 10 has to turn into a 20, into a 30, because the program is going 20 and 30 weeks, it will necessarily move everything to the left. And as it moves stuff to the left, you're going to lose room up top here. If you described the treatment as prompt for exercise every morning at 8:30 and you used all of those words at the top, the longer and longer you go, the more and more it gets squished, and the more and more it gets squished, the more cluttered it looks. And with our graphs, we're trying to be like Marie Kondo. We're going to take out all of the things that are cluttering, the things that don't cause us joy, and keep it as simple as possible, as clear as possible, because what we really want to pay attention to are the dots and the lines that are in the middle of the graph. We don't want anything on the periphery, anything on the edges to draw our eyes away unnecessarily or muddy the picture. Most of y'all are already engaging in a behavior, graphing your data, that is unfamiliar, that is overwhelming, that is easy to get into a forest for the trees type situation. So we don't want to do anything to add to that. Unnecessary visual clutter around the edges of the graph is probably one of the top 3 ways to do that. Now, we have our y-axis again, going from 0 to 60. Why did I pick from 0 to 60? It seemed intuitive. This is the part where you put down a tally or you do something else for my mentioning of it depends, because it depends. What I'm really most concerned about in selecting a 0 and a 60 is that I can see realistically and accurately and clearly how much these data points, how much the dots are going up and down and in which direction they're going. If I pick a number too large for 60, again, it's going to smush them all to the bottom of the graph. If I pick a number too small, I either might have dots going off the top of the graph, which is absolutely a no-no, or I might exaggerate how much they're going up and down by having too zoomed in of a focus. It's a balancing act, trying to not go too far in the smushing direction or too much in the exaggerating direction. Same thing for the weeks. Some folk are tempted to go week by week and extend it week by week. To me, that's unnecessary work, and that's not going to correlate to any additional ability to use the data and to use the graph. I tend to pick intervals of 5, 10, just because apparently the human brain is wired to like round numbers and 5s and 10s. Don't quote me on that. And then extending every so often. Also, having week as the x-axis means that I shouldn't have to be moving it very often at all. Here, I can still see what's going on. And what's going on, before I briefly touch on the spreadsheet before ending this particular video, is we have more or less a stable trend. If you drew, so I'm going to actually draw the line here. If you drew a line that had more or less the data points above and below, and I'm not going to get you in the habit of using color. Okay, fine. So we're going to use color here just because it's good for visual presentation, but if I ever catch color in your graphs, ask one of my students about how quickly that'll be addressed with feedback. Here, we have more or less a stable trend. It's going basically parallel to the x-axis, straight and to the right. The data are of low variability. They're not jumping up and down a whole bunch. We can be pretty confident that if we continued these baseline conditions, that the data would just kind of go off in this direction. That's the point of having at least 3 data points and looking for stability, for trend, and for variability. We want to be able to see where do we think this would go, and where we would predict this to go would be somewhere like this. It doesn't absolutely mean it's going to go that direction, but that would be the prediction based off of that rough estimate. And you hardcore single case design Stats and psychometrics folks, please forgive the fact that I have not done a goodness of fit or anything like that. Anywho, last thing, if I go back, these are the data, and this is how I entered everything in. You will also have the ability to look at the raw data sheet. I entered in notes again. You can enter in as many notes into here as possible. The only thing that would be a problem is if you continue to enter, they'll bleed into the next column. But you see, then they stop when you start having stuff in the column. So the solve for this is just to throw an X there. And you can get really fancy and just black that whole thing out, and it just looks like it goes into oblivion. Anywho, we're going to undo. Actually, why don't I just click no, tense. And back we go. As I mentioned in the last video, I manually calculated these numbers. I took a calculator that was not on the, or I took a calculator and typed it up, got the number, and entered in the number. I'll show you the other way to do it in another series of videos. Total days, these are all days or 7 weekdays. I started on January 1st just to highlight that New Year's resolution aspect. And then we have the formula that calculates the average daily minutes. We're not going to go into that quite yet. The last thing that I want to highlight, because this is something that will bear repeated mentioning, as it is not necessarily an intuitive concept to most folk, this line up and down here is our major phase line, because we need to put a wall between our baseline and our treatment. That helps us see where our baseline stops and where our treatment ends. If we take out the wall, sure, we can see the text description, the label at the top that goes over the dots, but we may not be able to, especially if we have 20, 30 points of treatment, it might get a little hard to tell which ones go to which. Easiest way, put a wall between them. It's easy to see who goes with what. The way that I'm doing this in this XY scatter plot graph, never, ever, ever use a line graph, is I am saying I have data here. I want my data to go from 3.5 to 0 and from 3.5 to 1,000. And Microsoft Excel says, I know what to do with data. I will draw a line from the bottom of the graph between 3 and 4 until 1,000 between 3 and 4. And because I have gone in and changed the y-axis to 60, it's drawing this line up to 1,000. Why 1,000? No particular reason other than it's a very large number relative to behavior, and it's unlikely to not reach the top of the graph. That is it for this particular video. I'm going to try and keep them all to 15 minutes or shorter. As always, perseverebook.com for all of your resources, and emailing perseverebook@gmail.com for all of your feedback, questions, curiosities, etc. I am more than happy to address them, most likely in doing some sort of recording like this, as it happens much more quickly than typing out a full email and probably correlates more to your understanding. Have a good day, friends.